These days, China's been selling itself as a stable partner in an uncertain world. Okay, so what to make of the bombshell news out of Beijing? Xi Jinping purging his top general, Zhang Youxia, with accusations against the 75-year-old loyalist that range from corruption to leaking nuclear secrets to the United States. We'll ask about the reasons and the timing. What with this move fueling speculation that an invasion of Taiwan could now come sooner rather than later. How soon? With what pushback? From a United States that's offering fresh armament for Taipei but not troop support, and from wary neighbors like Japan, where new nationalist Prime Minister Takaishi Sanae has taken a big gamble by calling a snap general election for this coming Sunday. More broadly, does this purge signal a very new chapter in the longest reign of China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking why the purge. Joining us from New York, Songyan Zoe Liu, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Adjunct Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for being with us from Taipei at this late hour. Brian Hyo, founder of New Bloom magazine and non-resident fellow at the University of Nottingham's Taiwan Research Hub. Welcome back to the show. He's editor-in-chief of Asia magazine, journalist Pierre-Antoine Denet, author in French of Taiwan Survives Free. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
And Claudia Astarida, researcher at Lyon's Far East Asia Institute and at the French Political Science Institute Sciences Po here in Paris. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yet not since 1971 has there been a shakeup at the top of China's People's Liberation Army. More on that January the 24th purge of Zhang Youxia with Camille Knight.
Zhang Youxia was once the president's most trusted military general, his second in command. He's now been placed under formal investigation, accused of grave violations of discipline and violations of the law, though the Defence Ministry has provided no details of the alleged misconduct. The drastic move lays bare major fractures within the military's most senior ranks. The 75-year-old is one of just a few leading officers with combat experience. He joined the People's Liberation Army in 1968, fought in China's war in Vietnam, and climbed the ranks to become Xi's most important ally in modernising the PLA, often taking to the international stage.
We hope to communicate with the armed forces of various countries and will continue to deepen China-Russia relations.
Another member of the Central Military Commission, Liu Zhenli, has also been placed under investigation by China's ruling Communist Party. Together, they were the two remaining leaders of its armed forces who had survived previous purges after 8 top generals were expelled back in October. This latest crackdown leaves Xi Jinping in sole operational control of the PLA, further consolidating his grip over the armed forces. Probes can last months or even years. Most are detained, found guilty, and removed from their positions in the party. More than 200,000 officials have been expelled since Xi came to power in 2012, part of a broad anti-corruption drive to root out graft. But it's also viewed by many as a way to ensure loyalty and make the military more combat-ready. In recent years, China has ramped up military drills around Taiwan, and the US government says Xi has ordered the PLA to prepare to seize the island by force by 2027.
Songyan Zoe Liu, let's dive right into it. Why this purge?
Who has not been able to talk with President Xi Jinping or his inner circle, it's very hard to explain or understand why. And any speculation or any discussion could only be based upon very fragmented information. So from that perspective, I'd say so far there are different reasons. One reason, as explained by newspapers like Wall Street Journal, saying that there is corruption, there is also potential connections of or charges that Zhang Youxia has leaked nuclear information to the American defense officials. But I'd say, again, here, the timing of the timing of this particular purge suggests that this is definitely not just as simple as anti-corruption. Part of the reason is because Zhang Youxia has been in the position of military procurement. So if you wanted to look into anybody in that position, there is always very likely questions to be raised.
Yeah, and him and Xi, they're both so-called princelings. Their fathers were active even before the communist takeover of 1949.
Yes, they are both the so-called princelings class. But here, I'd also say that if you look at President Xi Jinping's track record, his career and his rise does not come with no competitors. One such example was another princeling, Bo Xilai, who has since lost the political battle and was sent to prison.
Right. So a bit of skepticism, I sense, in the voice there of Zhang Yang when it comes to, for instance, this published report last week about leaking nuclear secrets to the United States that was done in the Wall Street Journal. What do you make of it, Claudia Astarita?
Well, I think it looks too huge to be true. That's true. But I agree also with my colleagues saying that we have very fragmented information and there's lots of speculation that we have to do. We can put things in perspective, grounding on many years of Chinese studies. But at the end, what we have seen that this purge of the very high level ranking generals of the PLA started with a leakage to the United States that was not made by the general on the very first place, but by the son of a general that was let's say, sharing secrets with the CIA. So it could be that not that Zhang Youxia himself shares secrets, but someone close to him maybe did. I don't know. That's pure speculation. But for sure, I mean, even...
So it's not to be ruled out completely. It could
No,
be
I don't think so.
Right.
There might be some nuances of truth in what was published by the Wall Street Journal. No.
And this question that the same article talks about implications for the country's military readiness. What are those?
Well, that's also something that we don't know exactly. Of course, we can imagine if we have hundreds of generals that are purged, then first, the atmosphere inside the army must not be great because we don't know until when we're going to stay, because if there are so many anti-corruption, let's say, investigation, that might be something on us and we don't know. From another perspective, we are talking about the Central Military Commission, that yes, it was on top of the PLA. At the same time, now what is clear is that there is only one person in charge, and this person is President Xi Jinping. So no, let's say, division will emerge anytime soon in the decision that the Central Military Commission will take. That's important, in my opinion.
Yeah, Xi Jinping, 72 years old. He's expected to see his 13-year-old reign prolonged next year at a party conference. And he finds himself, as Claudia was saying, at the top of a pyramid here. This is China's Central Military Commission. This is the one that was approved in 2022. Only two figures on this list still remain in this pyramid. Xi at the top, obviously, but also the guy in charge of purges, the general in charge of discipline, the Discipline Inspection Commission, Zhang Youxia. So there's supposed to be a 7-person military command here, and there's only 2 left. What does that tell you, Pierre-Antoine?
Well, as Claudia said, and also the lady in Washington, it's very difficult to really know the truth because the regime is quite opaque. But having said that, I see 2 possible reasons. The one is actually that he wants to rejuvenate the army, and he wants to promote young generals at the top. And why that? Because he wants the army to be prepared to fight. And having those old generals leaving is a sign that he wants to do that. And why having the army ready to fight? Because he said many times that the army must be ready to fight by 2027. He didn't openly mention Taiwan, But the CIA has said that they have the proof that he's, of course, aiming at Taiwan in 2027. This is next year. This is very soon. And so he may not be very impressed by the PLA as it stands now. And he wants to make sure that the progress is being made. This is the first reason I see. The second reason is that he might be a bit paranoid, as many totalitarian dictators are when they reach this age and this stature and being so long at power. We see that he has not singled out anyone to replace him. This is also a sign that, and actually I will add a third reason, he wants to show that he is the real master in China, the number one.
Did he need to do that though? He was already in charge, and he already has
Yes.
more power in his hands than any of his predecessors since Mao.
He must, because in the Chinese communism history, the army has many times shown signs of countering the civil power. So this is an area once he wants to be totally sure that he's the master there as well.
Brian Hio, you heard Pierre-Antoine Donnet there parse several reasons. What do you think is the most likely?
Well, it's very hard to know from the outside, and I think that fundamentally reflects the opaque nature of Chinese decision-making. And so there's the view, for example, this is to, in fact, prepare for war, removing someone that is speculated to have perhaps opposed having a costly and deadly invasion of Taiwan, because he did, of course, actually see military combat and know what the costs are. But what is, I think, interesting is particularly in Taiwan, the viewpoint has often divided among two different schools of thought. One is that, for example, having this purge makes it less likely that Xi will attack, because of the fact that it shows there are many issues in the PLA that still need to be reformed in order to prepare for any such hypothetical war scenario. On the other hand, the other view is that in removing people that could potentially check his power, and in concentrating power in the hands of one person who is less rational than a group of people, however small, that then makes it more likely that conflict could take place. And unfortunately, we just have to speculate from the outside right now. It's not exactly like the PLA is very open about source information or its decision making. And so I think it is something that people are very concerned about.
Brian, you mentioned at the outset there an important point about how General Zhang was a veteran of the war between China and Vietnam. We've seen how in the Trump administration there are young Turks for whom World War II is something of the distant past now. And so in taking pot shots at NATO, it doesn't bother them so much. Is there a generation gap in China likewise where young people might be more risk takers?
Well, that is a good question. It's very hard to know as well. Unfortunately, I think that there's the danger of putting someone ambitious at the top, a wolf warrior type, rather than someone that has memories of conflict. It's not necessarily the case that would occur, and I think that we do run ourselves into risk when we speculate as to what comes next. And perhaps sometimes just rampant speculation increases the odds of, in fact, of conflict. But I think that is the discourse. For example, when we discussed this window of 2027 for invasion of Taiwan, that was originally discussed as the time that the PLA would have the capacity to invade, not that they would, but as increasingly talked about by US and Taiwanese policymakers as will happen in 2027. And so I think particularly now, all eyes on what will occur next year, within this year and next year. And I think now Xi is in fact obligated to take some form of action, maybe short of a full-scale invasion or a blockade or anything like that, but just to have some show of force.
Song Yang, Zoe Liu, with this purge, China and Taiwan are closer to war?
I'd say it depends. And the risk of going to war, I'd say, likely has de-escalated, not just because perhaps the easiest way to lose power and risk regime survival is to risk going into a war and not having a decisive win. And by removing a lot of high-ranking military officials, there is a high chance that the PLA operational ability and its combat readiness have been significantly weakened. And then on top of that, just imagine a top leader make the decision. Everybody now knows that he is the only person responsible for any decision and any consequences. And I think that is a very not safe position to be in. And then lastly, I'd say the timeline about 2027 from US perspective, it is a moving target. It is the so-called a timeline, but not a cliff, meaning from Americans' perspective, we'd want American military officials and we want our defense forces to understand by that time, the PLA is going to have a significantly improved combat readiness as well as technological capacity, but that does not necessarily mean the PLA will make a move. And then finally, I'll just conclude by saying that if you ask Chinese younger generation to what extent their attitude towards Taiwan is, oftentimes you will hear, broadly speaking, two reactions. The first one is why the Westerners are so obsessed with Taiwan, and then secondly, they also raise the issue of why Chinese people will fight against the Chinese people. So I'd say, the one-child generation may not necessarily be as hawkish or as militant as one might imagine. But then on the other hand, for people, the generation who grew up after the global financial crisis, for those who are very accustomed to the narrative that the east wind prevails over the west wind, those are the folks who might think it's necessary to teach the West a lesson.
Pierre-Antoine Tonnet, speaking of lessons, it was interesting to hear what Zhang Yan just said about how young people are reacting inside of China. In this studio before February 2022, Russians were saying, "Well, why would we attack Ukraine? We're brothers and sisters. There's no reason." Of course, it did happen, and but is the war in Ukraine a cautionary tale for Xi Jinping?
Oh, it is, of course. It is also a message for Taiwan actually to get prepared. It's also showing that a small country can resist already 4 years against a much more powerful country as Russia. So, of course, this message has been digested in Beijing. But this is another reason why actually Xi Jinping wants to get ready. And he wants the army to get ready. That doesn't mean he wants to attack necessarily, but to get ready and to show that the army is ready is already a message for Taiwan and for the others. And it could be a hot war. I don't think there is any risk of a hot war next year, personally speaking. But it could be another form of war, mixing, just a normal classical war with embargo, with trying to paralyze the economy of Taiwan, with the aim of having Taiwan just not resisting and saying, okay. But who knows?
Brian Hill, on that point, the head of the opposition, Kuomintang, in Taiwan, with some pretty dovish statements in the last few days, questioning whether or not it was smart to ramp up military spending.
Yeah, that's right. So the domestic, historically pro-unification opposition of the KMT in Taiwan has taken aim at defense spending. For example, after blocking it more than 10 times in the legislature, including during the Chinese military exercises across the new year, they're advancing a version that has now cut between 60 to 70% of defense spending. Other statements by the KMT chair, Zhang Youxia, have also suggested that, for example, Ukraine provoked Russia into a defensive war by getting close to NATO, and that Taiwan could do the same through getting too close to the US. And so there's this US skepticism that the historically pro-unification party has embraced. She's also expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping perhaps in coming weeks. And so there's this skepticism, in fact, of building up Taiwan's defenses. And I think particularly at this juncture, oftentimes the claim is that, well, the US is not a reliable ally. You look at the Trump administration, China, in spite of its stability, is still on the rise. And so Taiwan's future lies with China. That is the argument that one does here. And it ventures sometimes into conspiratorial about the US, claiming the US has a secret plan to destroy Taiwan. But even in spite of, for example, these momentous shifts we see occurring in China that are quite threatening, still the claim is that China is more reliable.
Okay, so a couple of questions for you, Claudia Astorita. First of all, what do you make of this 2027 goal, deadline? I don't know how you characterize it.
Well, I think if we can go back just 1 second, there is one detail that we are underestimating in the purge in the Central Military Commission, because from a Chinese perspective, still, I believe that very soon there will be just one person, because the fact that there are investigations against the only general that is left are clear. The evidence that is there, and it is the same for the defense minister in China. So I guess Xi Jinping will remain alone. But the fact that he will remain alone as the only president of the Central Military Commission means something else. That he's taking full responsibility. He won't have anybody to blame, because he will be on his own. So the choices would be his. And to this, I think we have to connect another thing, that is that he needs to secure a legacy. Either he's going to stay for another mandate or not, and I think health is an issue because it's not eternal like many other people. But still, if it's not Taiwan, what kind of legacy President Xi Jinping is going to have for his 3 terms as a president of the People's Republic of China? That's important. And this, I think, resonates a lot with the strategy that he might have vis-a-vis Taiwan. Are we going to have a conflict? I don't believe in deadlines, because even Hong Kong was supposed to have a deadline that was in 30 years. And in fact, it was anticipated just because the occasion came for China to strengthen the control over Hong Kong. So I guess it's going to be exactly the same with Taiwan. I agree that it wouldn't be a very good move to start a military attack, because Chinese cannot attack their brother Chinese. It is one China, according to Beijing. But at the same time, if an occasion will materialize, it could be a fabricated one, it could be an authentic one, then for sure the PLA must prove that they will be ready to jump on it.
And Zhang Yuan's questions about the willingness to fight among the one-child policy generation.
Well, that's also very, I don't know, because I have lots of friends that are living in Fujian, that is the province that is just on the other side of Taiwan. And oddly enough, the comments that I get is that, well, time is ripe for Taiwan. We cannot continue forever and ever to have this very strange situation in which technically Taiwan is another province of China, but in reality, they have an autonomy that many people cannot sense. So, I mean, these are Chinese voices, of course, but I'm not sure that they will be against, also because probably they will feel galvanized by the modernization of the PLA, feeling that it will be a very rapid intervention if needed, or that another sort of negotiation will emerge.
Zhang Yuan, Zoe Liu, by next year, China will then have 9 aircraft carriers. We in France have 1. And the United States has 11. Your thoughts on this ramping up of the PLA? It's ramped up for sure, but it's untested, right?
Yes, PLA has, especially if combat readiness has not been tested. And from military modernization perspective, especially the prestige aspect of it, perhaps an untested military forces with very advanced weapon system and multiple aircraft carriers is probably the best case scenario. And on top of that, I'd say with the advancement in drone technology and in radars, probably the necessity of aircraft carrier in fighting a real war is not as useful as before we might have imagined. You know, by next year, you're right. In Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, probably the Chinese Navy is going to be, or the PLA is going to become the largest Navy having the largest number of aircraft carriers. Not because the Chinese are building more, but also because the U.S. is retiring some by next year. But then again, having aircraft carrier has more to say about a prestige, less so in terms of its usefulness in modern warfare, because it's just a giant thing, very easy to be detected, very hard to move.
All right. And what is for sure is that the quickening tensions over Taiwan predate by a long shot the latest purge, as we mentioned at the outset. And, you know, Japan's nationalist prime minister Sanae Takaishi. She's the one who's triggered snap elections for this coming Sunday. She's talking tough. She has been since last November when it came to military maneuvers by Beijing around Taiwan.
If China were to deploy battleships and involve the use of force, I believe this could be deemed a situation threatening Japan's survival.
And that created a storm. It created a trade war between China and Japan. We even saw for the first time in 54 years, Japan last week without pandas. Crowds at Tokyo's Ueno Zoo beating a tearful goodbyes to Xiao Xiao and Lei Lei before their return to China. They even called back their pandas. Pierre-Antoine Donnet, what does that tell you?
It tells me that when she said that, the Prime Minister of Japan, she was just saying the truth. The truth is that if there is a hot war declared by Beijing against Taiwan, Japan, willingly or not, would be involved, because the first targets would be the US bases in Japan. And so missiles would fly towards Japan territory. And the Japanese leadership, and actually the Japanese population, they know that. So they have to get prepared as well. And she may have said a bit too much and too rapidly what was the intention. But this is written in a law which was passed in 2015, saying that Japan reserves the right to involve itself in a war if its core interests are threatened. And if there is a war between China and Taiwan, the core interest and the strategic, the core of Japan would be threatened.
Brian Yo, is it a given that Beijing would strike at US bases in Japan?
Well, it's hard to know, I think, particularly in the present political climate. But I think it's worth remembering, for example, that Okinawa is geographically closer to Taiwan than to the rest of the Japanese archipelago. The total flight time in air, the actual time flying, is about an hour. Even without considering the US bases that are there, it is very easy for Japan to get involved. Particularly China, though, with its very strong reaction to Takaichi, is hoping to set a red line to frame this as having been a provocation, in that sense to hopefully split off Japanese support from Taiwan. For example, you see the discourse about targeting Japan. Well, why would you sacrifice your children's lives for Taiwan? Though, interestingly enough, such rhetoric could be directed at China as well. But I think particularly now, China will be quite emphatic on this point.
All right, so the possibility of a regional war, it's Japan, it's Taiwan, perhaps also the Philippines. They've frequently had standoffs with China's Navy. We can maybe show Claudia Astarita. Can you tell us a little bit about this map that you see here?
Well, once again, this map shows very well that the interests of China includes Taiwan, includes the South China Sea, where China has been able to basically militarize islands that are reclaimed by multiple countries in the area. And now with the PLA Navy that is on these rocks that have become islands, I guess we can continue to complain, but nobody can really ask the PLA Navy to move away. So what is important for China is to have access to the Pacific, and either it comes from the south, from Taiwan, but I would say also from the north, because the war against Ukraine has created lots of leverage for China to, well, first change its position on the Kurili Islands, because before China was neutral. Now it says...
This is the dispute between Russia and Japan.
Exactly. Before China was more on the Japanese side, now they say they're neutral. Then we have new maps where all the territories close to Vladivostok don't have Russian names any longer, but they do have Chinese names. So I think in the bargaining with Moscow, there's also maybe the control over territories that for China also belong to China. So they need to access the Pacific in order to impose themselves as a military power. So in one way or another, they will never give up. And that's the problem.
Let's turn to New York City. Zhongyang Zoe Liu. What would the United States do?
That's a good question. Here, for the current Donald Trump administration, The word to describe his foreign policy is uncertain. But that being said, so far, no one in his administration has the full portfolio of China, which basically means a lot of decisions is going to come down to him. And we also know that he's scheduled, at least so far, he's scheduled to visit Beijing in April. I know that from now to April, a lot can happen. But so far, it seems that the Trump administration has been toning down with regard to pressuring China. Although he did continue arms sales to Taiwan, he just loves arms sales. But that being said, knowing that he and the Republicans are having a midterm election, which is looking not very promising, he also knows that China knows exactly where to push back if he escalates tensions against China. So at least for this year, tension between U.S. and China and the risk of the Trump administration to take any clear positions with regard to defending Taiwan or not, we do not anticipate anything coming out from the White House.
Brian Hyo, you agree?
I think so. I mean, it's very hard to know, if anything, where the Trump administration will go. And so while we're often talking about this elite Chinese politics is rather opaque, I think because of power also being in the hands of a rather unpredictable political leader in the US, we have a difficulty knowing what will occur. There are times in which Trump is harsh on China and the times in which he shifts towards unpredictable rapprochement. Taiwan has often, I think, been increasingly cautious of the idea of Trump dealing away Taiwan as part of some kind of bargain with Xi, perhaps seeing Taiwan as a geopolitical chess piece in that sense. And so there is much anxiety going into any Trump-Xi meeting for Taiwan, particularly after, for example, Venezuela. There were immediately conspiratorial claims that broke out on the Taiwanese internet that perhaps the U.S. had come to a deal with China, that the U.S. gets Venezuela and China, well, perhaps gets Taiwan. And that's conspiratorial, but I think reflects where social sentiment is at sometimes regarding views of the U.S.
Yeah, because China got egg on its face in Venezuela, Pierre-Antoine Donnet. It's the main trading partner of the regime of ousted President Nicolas Maduro, and it was helpless in his removal, some say kidnapping, from Caracas. What say you when it comes to Trump and Taiwan? Could there be some kind of grand bargain?
Well, that's the fear among some Taiwanese leaders, but unsaid fears. I mean, they wouldn't say that openly, but there is a kind of unease about him because he's so versatile. He changes ideas every day almost. But one thing has to be said is that the stake of Taiwan is very high for the U.S. Because as Claudia mentioned...
It's high for us too, because we need their computer chips.
Yeah, that's one thing. But the other thing is on the military side. One thing, as you said, TSMC and the chips. But as important is the military balance. Because if you look at the map that you showed before, Taiwan is exactly in the middle of the first chain of islands, giving access to the Pacific. If this chain is broken, if China mastered that piece of land, the whole equilibrium in terms of military power would be changed in the region. Because after the South China Sea, China would then control the Yellow Sea plus possibly the Japan Sea. That is adding 38,000 million kilometers of sea. So that's enormous. So I don't see the US just giving up on Taiwan. It's rather impossible for another reason yet, because it's a question of confidence from their allies in the region. If they don't try to support Taiwan in a way or another, this confidence would be broken for a very long time to come from Japan, South Korea, Australia, and many other countries.
All right, and we're going to talk about the pronouncements of Donald Trump in the past week. He was reacting first to Canada's Prime Minister traveling to Beijing. This was just before the World Economic Forum in Davos. There, Mark Carney announced a trade deal that would lower tariffs on imports of Chinese electric vehicles. And then, in the past week, it was the UK Prime Minister's turn. A first visit to China in 8 years. Keir Starmer showing up with some 50 British business leaders in tow.
The French President has visited and engaged. The German Chancellor is coming to visit and to engage. For the UK to be the only country that refuses to engage would be not in our national interest. And the opening up of access has been hugely well received by business in the last 24 hours. They're already reporting that the atmosphere has changed and the willingness to do business has gone up. This is a good thing for our economy.
So the US president reacting with threats of tariffs against both Canada and Britain.
Well, it's very dangerous for them to do that, and it's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China. Canada is not doing well. They're doing very poorly, and you can't look at China as the answer. I know China very well. I know President Xi is a friend of mine. I know him very well, but that's a big hurdle to go over when you get Canada.
Okay, so in that clip, Claudia Sarita, Donald Trump mad at Mark Carney, who gave that speech in Davos, and talking about Xi Jinping as his friend.
I guess if we listen to Donald Trump, he's everyone's friend. So, I mean, that's not new. But I think that something that is very interesting is really this fact that he's not talking about Taiwan. And all he's doing is basically targeting China. So, and this is actually the last example. So, blaming the UK and Canadian leader to get too close to China. Venezuela was a symbol, and before we had Panama, when he basically kicked out Chinese ports from Panama. And then there are other countries that are sort of accepting unofficial deals like Argentina, Brazil, that they are fine, the US is okay for them to continue their business relationship with China, but no strategic relationship whatsoever. They cannot be improved. So, and Greenland goes in a way in the same direction. The interest on Iran, the new interest on Pakistan, it looks to me that everything is related to China. And if we try to be a little bit strategic, what I see is that you want to see Xi Jinping at the moment in which he has proven that he is the one that is, let's say, much stronger when they will have to negotiate on the same table. Until a couple of months ago, we had the feeling that we are about equal on the same table. And now Trump is becoming stronger again. So not talking about Taiwan doesn't necessarily need that there is an agreement that is sealed, but maybe it's too early to give tips to China and then allowing them to adjust when they have the time. Yeah.
Zhang Youxia, there's this question of the power balance between the superpowers. Xi Jinping, again, I come back to what we were initially talking about, this purge of top brass in the military. Does he feel more threatened or stronger when you look at how China's growth has still hit 5% this year despite a dropping population? Does he feel in a position of strength or weakness when it comes to the United States?
There are several indicators. If we only look at how China performed and reacted and retaliated against the United States last year and forced the Trump administration not only to accommodate China, but actually made some compromises, especially in the chips industry, for example, then let's say Chinese leaders and President Xi Jinping has all the reasons to feel strong. But then on the other hand, if we look at China's domestic issues, from population to weak growth to overcapacity, in addition to China's seemingly weakening or overseas interests, such as in Venezuela and broadly speaking Latin America region, then President Xi Jinping, he would have a lot of reason to be worried. But if we only look at President Xi Jinping versus President Trump, I'd say President Xi Jinping, he has no illusion that at least militarily, as demonstrated through the special operation conducted by the Trump administration in Venezuela, President Xi Jinping recognized that the PLA does not have that kind of special multi-dimensional cooperation operation power. So from that perspective, I'd say probably one of the most important lessons that Xi Jinping have learned from the experience from the action in Venezuela is that the PLA need to wrap up some special operation capability going forward.
All right, so the PLA needs to level up. That could be a possible partial explanation. Zhang Yuan, you mentioned the domestic issues. And by the way, the purges aren't just in the military. Since China's zero COVID policy, travel restrictions were lifted, the number of those punished for taking bribes has soared. We can show you the monthly figures as compiled by the Economist magazine. But it's soared to dizzying heights. Zongyang Zoe Liu, what does this tell you? Tell you that there's been a lot more corruption since COVID, or the regime is much more on edge?
I'd say it goes to say the regime is putting their hands at where their mouth is. You know, the anti-corruption campaign has been going on for over a decade now, and in a lot of ways, across countries around the world, sometimes kickbacks and corruption is a way to go around red tape. Some scholars describe that as lubricant. The fact that there are more crackdown doesn't mean corruption become more severe. It simply means there are more data, more punishment. Now, does this mean the regime feel less secure? I think that's one possibility, the idea that they need to do more so that the ordinary Chinese people who were frustrated about weak economic growth, lack of personal economic security, they might have felt, okay, so the party is doing something for me. But then on the other hand, it could also be interpreted as the party feel extremely secure because they now can do large-scale punishment or purges. So I guess it's really because the fragmented nature of information, the opacity, we couldn't say definitively.
One final question, I'll put it to you, Claudia Estarita. Xi Jinping is not Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, but still, I think he started his first mandate saying that his goal was to clean up the party, to enlighten the party again, as he said. And he is continuing. So to a certain extent, I would say he is obsessed by factions, and Chinese politics made by faction. The Central Military Commission was grounded on two major factions. Now everybody's out. So we don't have this issue anymore. But he's trying to make sure that there is nobody that is creating a counter voice. At the same time, I wonder, is he really able to maintain this power in this way? And so is he really buying Chinese politicians or party members' hearts for real? Or at one point there would be a backlash because they won't stand in any longer in this? I don't know.
All right, we'll broach the question again. I want to thank you, Claudia Estarita. I want to thank Pierre-Antoine Donnet, Zongyang Zoe Liu for being with us from New York, Brian Hyo for staying up late in Taipei. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.